Let me begin by saying, as I suspect you know, that I am not a great fan of unfettered free trade. I helped lead the effort when I was in the House against NAFTA and against permanent normal trade relations with China. I will never forget a visit that I made to the Macadillo area in Mexico, where I saw brand new factories and literally Mexican workers living in cardboard boxes. And the result, of course, was the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs, good-paying jobs in this country, transferring them to Mexico where people work for horrendous wages. That is the type of trade policy which I detest. But I want to move to an area to talk about the legal basis of what President Trump has done. President Trump said, Mr. Greer, that he had no choice in terms of Canada, and I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border. He had no choice but to bypass Congress and to impose an emergency 25% tariff on Canada to stop, quote, the massive, end quote, amount of fentanyl and, quote, the millions and millions of undocumented immigrants coming from the northern border. Unfortunately, that's a lie. The truth is that the U.S. Customs and Border Protection reported just 43 pounds of fentanyl was seized at the Canadian border last year, representing just 0.2% of the total. Now, we could agree that 1 pound of fentanyl is too much. But if 0.2% constitutes an emergency, my guess is illegal drugs are coming in from every country in the world. And that gives the President of the United States incredible power to determine tariffs. Further, he said he talked about millions and millions of undocumented immigrants coming from Canada. In fact, last year there were 24,000 people, not millions and millions. First question, really, we can argue about tariffs, but why does the president have to lie all of the time in order to make his point?
So, Senator, I would just refute that when the president is talking about the nature of the emergency we have. I mean,
could you talk a little bit closer into the mic, please?
Certainly. Senator, I would just say, I think you need to look at what the president issued in terms of the order for the legal basis for what we're doing, right? I mean, the president very rightly hit on this issue of fentanyl migration coming from northern southern borders, and it's a real emergency.
Drugs are a real emergency. 0.2%. You can then argue illegal drugs come from every country in the world. If you declare that as an emergency, you're giving the President of the United States unbelievable power. Let me go on that point. Let me mention to you what you probably know. 7 Republicans have joined a number of Democrats on legislation reasserting Congress's ability to play an active role in trade and tariffs. That, on the Republican side, was led by Senator Grassley. And he said, and I quote, "For too long, Congress has delegated its clear authority to regulate interstate and foreign commerce to the executive branch, et cetera, et cetera." He wants to reassert Congress's constitutional role and ensure Congress has a voice in trade policy, end of quote. In the last 2 weeks, all we have seen is reports in the newspaper. Congress has not had 1 ounce of authority in determining tariff policy. Do you think Congress should be completely left out of the process? Or does the president have emergency power to do anything he wants with regard to tariffs?
Senator, my staff has had over 200 meetings with congressional offices in the past 2 months to consult. The president's been very transparent about what he wants to do on tariffs. Congress delegated a law to him to take this action.
Mr. Greer, you can have all the meetings you want. You and I had a nice meeting. But at the end of the day, the president did exactly what he wanted to do without any discussion, formal discussion with members of Congress. He could make recommendations to Congress, that's for sure. Do you really think that he has the power under an emergency degree to reorder the trade world, global trade policy, without any input from the United States Congress?
Sir, Congress gave him this law where if he determines a national emergency, he can take appropriate action to regulate imports. That's what he's done.
And you think it's a national emergency that 0.2% of fentanyl coming from Canada constitutes a national emergency?
Sir,
do you?
The president has determined that Canada...
I'm asking you.
You're asking me about drug policy. So I agree with the president. If you have China and Canada and Mexico putting drugs into this country at different levels, then that's an emergency. We have to deal with it.
Look, we're not going to argue about the danger of drugs. 43 pounds of fentanyl. On that basis, the president can declare an emergency with any country on earth and take unlimited power. That's called authoritarianism. Okay? That's not what a democracy does. Do you have any concerns about all of that power going into the hands of the president?
Sir, Congress delegated this power to the president. He has to renew the emergency every year. He has to.
Thank you for watching Crossline Politics. Before we get into this, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a breakdown of what's really happening in Washington. What we just watched is a powerful moment from Senator Bernie Sanders, and it deserves real attention. In this exchange, Sanders calls out both the economic failures of past free trade deals and the dangerous expansion of presidential emergency powers. He reminds us why he opposed NAFTA and permanent trade relations with China in the first place. Because they shipped hundreds of thousands of American jobs to places where workers were treated like disposable labor, living in conditions no human being should ever endure. That is not fair trade. That is exploitation. But the heart of this clip is Sanders exposing the false justification behind President Trump's emergency tariffs on Canada. The president claimed millions and millions of undocumented immigrants were pouring across the northern border, and that fentanyl from Canada justified bypassing Congress. Sanders counters with the actual numbers. Only 43 pounds of fentanyl seized at the northern border last year, less than 0.25% of the national total, and only 24,000 unauthorized crossings. Not millions. Facts matter, especially when emergency powers are on the table. Sanders makes a critical point. If such tiny numbers can justify a national emergency, then a president could declare an emergency with any country on earth and reshape global trade single-handedly. That is not how a democracy works. Congress is supposed to have a voice, and leaders from both parties, Republicans like Chuck Grassley and Democrats alike, are pushing to take that power back. That bipartisan concern says everything. As a patriot, I believe Sanders is exactly right here. National emergencies should not be political weapons. They should not be excuses to override Congress, and they should never be built on misinformation. Our system depends on checks and balances, and when a president can unilaterally reorder global trade with questionable claims, every American should be paying attention. If you value clear explanations, honest analysis, and holding power accountable, make sure you subscribe to Crossline Politics and share this message. Our democracy works only when we stay informed and engaged.